everyone, Michelle Fixit here. Today I'm going to be reading Against the Flow of Mississippi, written by Anthony Allen, or written by Anthony Oksenholt. This is my cousin that you guys have seen in a couple of my videos. So I'm going to flip you guys around so you can see the cover of the book. Here you are. We're in the cat room, so it's a little messy. All right. So to begin with, he wants to say, Against the Flow of Mississippi, trying to make it read like it's easier for you guys. Against the Flow of Mississippi, written by Anthony Allen. This book is dedicated to the memory of all who lost their lives during Hurricane Katrina on August 29, 2005. Hurricane Katrina made direct landfall on the Mississippi Gulf Coast as an intense Category 3 hurricane. Hurricane Katrina killed over 1,200 people spanning from the Bahamas to the Mississippi and Louisiana Gulf Coast and forever changed the face of many of the places mentioned in this book. And then, of course, he signed it. So it says, Michelle, thank you for welcoming me to the family. Anthony Allen. All right, so about the author. Anthony Allen is a native of Biloxi, Mississippi, where he was born September 4th, 1984. His grandfather was a very corrupt public official in the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s. Anthony despises the corruption and the misdeeds of those in office. He is very politically involved in the Libertarian movement, and he understands the injustice being committed on this country by the media and SuperPACs. Multi-million-dollar war chests given by donors who can't support the candidates with their votes, and poor, honest candidates who don't get the exposure from the media because either they can't pay for it or their message isn't popular with the ones in charge. He authored this book to show how easy the public can beat the corrupt political superpowers if they are informed and thoroughly research their candidates they consider giving their votes to. Copyright 2018, Against the Flow of Mississippi. Forward. I first thought of the idea for this book during the 2018 midterm elections. I saw the candidates who would make excellent representatives and lawmakers serve our great country that were refused good press by either the good old boy system or the media. If all of the prospective candidates who were running for office were given a chance to fill the office they sought, they might have significantly contributed to the freedom and liberties that we enjoy and take for granted in this country. I have helped several third-party candidates by attempting to spread their word on social media or my podcast. I think the public is missing an excellent opportunity to move forward and progress by judging solely on party lines or voting for the lesser of the two evils. If you vote for the lesser of the two evils, evil still wins. I saw this during the 2016 and 2020 elections on both sides of the aisle. The media nearly silenced third-party candidates while the talking heads forced their agenda down our throats. I feel we as a nation should rise and stand tall, especially with the beautiful invention of the internet at our disposal, to stand on our principles and vote on our conscience. I further feel it is the obligation and duty of every voter to thoroughly research every candidate on the ballot to ensure the best candidate is elected. In 2016 and 2020, we have had more than two parties on every ballot in all 50 states for president. A third-party candidate with those chances is not electable with the ballot access in every state. I also feel that people get comfortable with the devil you know. The devil you know does not have your best interest at heart. That is, in fact, why he or she is a devil. Uneducated and undereducated voters have set this example for years in my home state of Mississippi. We have had senators in the same seat for over 40 years. From 1943 until 2018, we had 2 senators fill 1 seat. James Eastland was a senator from 1943 until 1978, and Thad Cochran from 1978 until 2018. I feel this needs to stop. Dick Nolan, a columnist for the San Francisco Examiner, is quoted in 1966 as saying, "Seasoned politics watchers can only remind the gloomies that a more or less regular turnover is good for the republic. In a sound of democracy, our rulers ought to be changed routinely, like diapers, for the same reason." I agree wholeheartedly. If politics fear nothing but election time, we will forever have a problem that we cannot fix. We must hold our elected officials to a much higher standard and remind them that their campaign is a job interview. Re-election is not a popularity contest, yet an actual review of the job they are doing as our employees. If a candidate promises, it is then our job to ensure the candidate upholds that promise. An example would be if a mayoral candidate promised to mow the grass in front of City Hall every week. It is always a good policy to ensure that said candidate upholds it. If a candidate doesn't follow through, it is our job to fire them with our ballots. We should never be afraid of telling our employees of our opinions regarding the job they are doing for us, good or bad. It is my hope, as the author of this book, that we will remember the power that we hold over elected employees, and that we will remind them that they will do what we want them to do, or we will not give them their job back, meaning we will not vote for them in the next election. I believe that this is not only our right, but our patriotic duty. Prologue. Jake Fayard was an honorable man, well versed in the Constitution, entirely in love with the idea of liberty. The ones that the founding fathers, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Patrick Henry, and Thomas Paine stood for. He felt that community service was the purpose of every politician. He also felt that politicians who were for sale should be imprisoned for life. Jake served in the United States Marine Corps as both an enlisted man and an officer. He graduated from the Naval Academy at Annapolis, Maryland. He served as a fighter for justice in the courtroom and on the battlefield. Jake didn't relish the idea of politics until he started paying attention and seeing the public corruption. He was tired of seeing the very fabric that made this country so great torn apart at the seams. During his stint in the Marine Corps, Jake was an apolitician. He refused to debate or discuss any current events. He was a man that simply did his job. When the terrorist attacks happened on September 11th, 2001, happened in New York City, Washington, D.C., and Shanksville, Pennsylvania, Jake was assigned as a special counsel on several intelligence commissions regarding the war on terror in Afghanistan and Iraq. He saw the lies perpetrated on the citizens of the United States. He was ordered under the classified nature not to report on what he heard or saw. It disturbed him greatly to see a government body manipulating the very people it was supposed to be protecting. Jake was never a great fan of the Republican Party. He also distrusted the Democratic Party. He had a definite distrust of all politicians and the media. His Masonic Blue Lodge brother and best friend, Kobe Baranovich, convinced him that running for office was a tangible way to serve his country. It took Kobe almost a year to convince him to put his name on the ballot. Kobe had already served 2 years as the Attorney General for the state of Mississippi by the time Jake decided to run for office. Jake was introduced to the leaders of Mississippi. Republican Party by Kobe, and wasn't impressed with the political machine that had a foothold on the state for decades. On January 21st, 1970, Jake Fayard was born and raised in a modest home in East Biloxi. His father was a small business owner who thrived in Biloxi's fishing heritage. His family had no political ambition except for an uncle on his father's side, an attorney who ran for circuit court judge and lost by 500 votes. The votes in that election came from constituents above and below ground. Many people resurrected themselves from the dead to cast their ballot for one candidate or the other. There were no safeguards in place to stop the departed from voting. This was the norm for the day. Campaigning in the cemeteries was commonplace. Candidates had to be sure that the dead didn't vote twice, so the candidates were careful of which cemeteries they took their prospective names from. Usually, candidates would pull the names of the recently departed from their families or close friends or other relatives. Obituaries of the recently departed were also a great source of information. These dead voters were not purged from the voters' rolls, and with the face of so many obtaining a ballot to vote, keeping up with those who voted twice was almost impossible, especially in different precincts. After the close loss of the election, public office would never again be sought after by a member of the Fayard family until the 21st century. That is when Jake decided a run for Senate was in order. The race for Senate would be a personally trying and very great struggle for Jake, who reminded himself to keep his temper in check. The trials would see his son arrested, his life threatened, and his world almost wholly ripped apart. The trials would prove to be for a noble cause, though. Jake showed that he is a leader and a force to be reckoned with. He keeps his promises and overcomes the adversary with dignity and respect. He sets the example that men and women in office should follow. Chapter 1. The Campaign. The sign read, Jake for Senate. Jake Fayard was a native of Biloxi, Mississippi, where he lived until his 19th birthday. He enlisted in the United States Marine Corps and was shipped off to boot camp in Parris Island, South Carolina. He had served 2 tours in Iraq before being appointed to the Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. He graduated with honors near the top of his class. He was commissioned as a second lieutenant and had served another tour in Bosnia and finished his career in Afghanistan. Jake was wounded in combat during his career as an infantryman. He was hit by shrapnel from a firefight in Kuwait. The details of his injury caused him to win the Navy Cross by saving 3 fellow Marines from a roadside ambush during the First Gulf War. After he recovered in the hospital in Germany, Jake applied for appointments to the Naval Academy in Annapolis. Being already combat wounded and having won the Navy Cross for his heroism in combat, Congressman Al Green of the 5th District of Mississippi awarded him the request. Jake graduated summa cum laude from the United States Naval Academy. In 1996, Jake was promoted to the rank of second lieutenant. Once he was promoted to the rank of captain, Jake asked his friend, commanding officer, Rear Admiral Thomas Bond, to remain at Belle Chase Naval Air Station in New Orleans. The Admiral approved Jake's request, and he began law school at Tulane. During his time at Tulane, he was often involved in harsh debates. Debates over war, gun control, the military, allowing gays, you name it. Most of the law school students were ultra-liberal. Many of them despised Jake and his best friend Kobe Baranovich for being Marines and being enrolled in class. Jake pulled Kobe, the hot-headed of the two, out of many fights and very honestly probably kept Kobe from being expelled on more than one occasion. Jake was a giant of a man. When he walked into a room of his peers, standing 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighing 230 pounds, his athletic build and low body fat were probably due to his workout regime. He enjoyed running 3 miles every morning on the beach in solitude just before sunrise. His hair was just turning slightly gray around the sideburns, but overall, Jake aged well. The Marine Corps had taught him how to be tough. He still supported a clean-shaven look and still carried his military bearings when he walked into his campaign headquarters on Pass Road in Biloxi. Everybody in Biloxi knew Jake well. After his combat tours, he attended Tulane Law School on his GI Bill and became a JAG officer. He had helped prosecute a few terrorists for war crimes and served on various intelligence commissions and military tribunals. He was promoted fast, and now, at the age of 45, retired from the Marine Corps as a full bird colonel. Jake had a small law office in downtown Biloxi on Howard Avenue in Vieux Marché Mall. The mall was a walking mall with a concrete one-lane road. The bars and restaurants that the city of Biloxi envisioned calling the place home were slow in arriving. A couple of nightclubs, one hardware store, a medical office located 1 block from Biloxi Regional Medical Center, and a small po' boy restaurant called Shuckers, which Jake frequented. Jake's Masonic Lodge, Magnolia Lodge number 120, was located 2 blocks from his office, on the corner of Howard Avenue and Main Street, where he would attend lodge meetings and fellowship with his brethren Thursday nights. It was at the lodge that Jake formally announced his campaign intentions. His brethren applauded his efforts. Jake served as a past master of the lodge with distinction. Jake had no vices, an oddity coming from a town with such a checkered past, and was once known as the playground of the South. He spoke with a thick East Biloxi accent, made up of a southern drawl with the New Orleans swagger. Point Cadet, or simply the Point, was East Biloxi's rougher side. It was known back in the old days of the late 1890s to the 1960s as producing some of the most uncivilized people alive. Those descendants of the Slavic, Croatian, Cajun, and later Vietnamese families who would naturally pull themselves up from their bootstraps kind of people are now the ones running the city. Jake Fayard was one of French descent, being one of the oldest in Biloxi. It was something he prided himself on. Jake's family arrived in Biloxi in the early 1720s. Biloxi at the time was a French possession. His 7th great-grandfather, Jacques Fayard, was a French settler convinced by the infamously fraudulent John Law to move to the Louisiana colony. John Law was a notable con artist who swindled multiple people moving into the area with claims of lush green farmland and prey that practically posed before the hunter. When the settlers arrived, they saw rough conditions and an unwelcome climate of high humidity and hurricanes. Jacques flourished, and his descendants, Jake being one of them, still call Biloxi home. Jacques Fayard was a carpenter serving on a French ship of the line which docked in Brest, France. Jacques left Brest in 1719 and made his voyage across the Atlantic and arrived in Biloxi in 1720. There, he became a settler and became a soldier defending the capital of New France. In 1723, the capital moved to New Orleans. Jacques Fayard resigned his appointment and stayed in Biloxi. With a French land grant, he owned land on the north side of the bay in what is presently called d'Iberville, named for the founder of the city of Biloxi. The Fayard family has remained in Biloxi since the ship landed over 300 years ago. Jake was a proud member of several societies and organizations, such as Phi Kappa Phi, which he joined as a midshipman at the Naval Academy in Annapolis, 3rd degree Freemason, 32nd degree Scottish Rite, a Shriner, Sons of the American Revolution, General Society of War of 1812, Sons of Confederate Veterans, Military Order of the Stars and Bars, American Legion, and the Veterans of Foreign Wars. Jake loved history, and he knew it well. He was known for his community service, not just for taking a pro bono legal work for indigent clients, but also for his community service as a ham radio operator. He was also an auxiliary police officer for the Biloxi Police Department. He helped and directed traffic for Mardi Gras parades and special events where the Biloxi Police Department needed a few extra officers. Auxiliary cops didn't get paid, but they still had arrest powers and were sworn law enforcement officers. He didn't do this very often due to his time constraints with his law firm, but he always was in the mood to help. Jade prided himself on being one of the foremost self-proclaimed historians of the Biloxi Rifles, 3rd Mississippi Infantry, Confederate States Army, which he descended. He was a real child of Biloxi. He loved his heritage and held it with a badge of honor. In his office was a picture of his 3rd great-grandfather in uniform. The grandfather was a captain in the Biloxi Rifles. His 2nd great-grandfather had fought under Theodore Roosevelt in the Spanish-American War. His great-grandfather served in the U.S. Army during World War I. His grandfather served in the U.S. Navy during World War II, and his father served in the Marine Corps during the Vietnam War. Jake followed the tradition of military service and was proud to enlist to serve in the Gulf War. Jake loved the military so much that he made a career out of it. Biloxi was once known as a boom town full of illegal gambling establishments, strip clubs, prostitution, and vibrant drug trade. Biloxi, founded in 1699 by the French when they needed a base close to the Mississippi River, was almost entirely lawless until recent history. The Biloxi Strip, as it was known, was located between Beauvoir, the last home of the Confederate President Jefferson Davis, and Rodenberg Avenue has since been cleaned up. Biloxi hadn't had a gangland-style shooting or killing in the last few decades. The last time such an occurrence happened was in 1967 when Harry Bennett was murdered on the Strip. The last majorly publicized crime in Biloxi was a circuit court judge and his wife, a mayoral candidate, was murdered in the 1980s. That was the end of corruption from the coast central organized criminal elements. When the judge and his wife were murdered, the end result was all of the previously illegal vices in Biloxi became legal, legitimate, licensed businesses. All that was left now were the usual regular street thugs that ran the ghettos and the low-rent apartment complexes in the city of Biloxi. It did not exclude the possibility that one may occur, though. Biloxi still possessed a notably quiet underworld. The old strip clubs are gone, either wiped away by the tides of various hurricanes or the bulldozer to make way for legitimate businesses, and the gambling that is conducted is legal. The near dockside casinos are mostly run by Las Vegas corporations and pay taxes. The old underworld was a very vivid memory to some, but was fading fast for others. Other than an occasional $50 played at the craps table on a rare occasion, none of the vices of Biloxi had caught Jake. He didn't smoke at all. He would drink very rarely, hardly gambled, didn't run around with a bunch of women or anything of that sort. He was a very devout Catholic and attended Mass at Our Lady of Fatima, one of the prominent Catholic churches that dotted the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Jake was a widower, losing his wife to cancer just 4 years after they had married, and had dated some, but had never remarried. His last date was almost 8 years previous, and he was happy living his life in solitude. His son Roy was 3 years old when his mother died, and Jake did his best to juggle home life, the military, college, and being a father. His maternal grandmother raised Roy for most of his youth. He was known for running with the rough crowd. Jake's mother was still alive and lived in their old family home on Hoxie Street. His father had died 5 years earlier at the age of 70. He left Jake a large inheritance that allowed Jake to buy a house in West Biloxi on Travia Avenue and open his log firm. Jake's home in West Biloxi was modest, though, enough. A small 1,500 square foot 3-bedroom house located in the center of the street was innocuous enough that Jake could lead a quiet life. No high walls or fences were surrounding the yellow brick structure. A carport, a 40-foot ham radio tower containing a medium-sized Cushcraft Logie antenna for high-frequency communication, and a small tool shed. Just merely a short chain-link fence. There were no security measures either, as this too was unnecessary. The house could have fit in on any block in any medium-sized city in America. Jake's father, Jake Sr., was a shrimp boat captain and had a run of good luck trading on Wall Street. He left Jake an extensive portfolio of blue chip stocks for him to fall back on. Jake Sr. smartly bought Apple and Microsoft stock in the 1980s and Google stock in the late 1990s. This also made it possible for Jake to fund most of his campaign on his own. Jake maintained ownership of the shrimp boat, but he had no formal business dealings with it. He allowed a friend of the family who was in the seafood industry named Slick Deserporte to manage the boat and distribute to Jake his share. It brought a mild income, but not much more. Jake used the shrimp boat as a tax deduction for business expenses. Anna's mother and father were both still alive. They were in their 70s and lived in a retirement community in Ocean Springs. The old house that Roy grew up in was demolished during Hurricane Katrina when the water covered East Biloxi. The house was a beautiful white single-story structure. The walls were of tongue-and-groove construction. The house was built in the 1920s, presumably by some Croatian immigrants who wanted their home to last for years. The house stayed through several hurricanes until the water from Katrina moved the structure off its foundation and deposited the house in the middle of Howard Avenue. As a result, the house was demolished to reopen the infrastructure in East Biloxi. Jake Fayard was an honorable man. Everybody could vouch for his loyalty and integrity. As he informed his standing room only crowd at the Biloxi White House Hotel, his reasons for running were to defeat the old corruption running rampant and unchecked for years. He started thinking about running a year ago when he read an article online calling Mississippi the most corrupt state in America. Jake hated the image that other people had about his state being a bunch of backwards rednecks. He was a proud Mississippian and wished that people would see Mississippi for the excellent culture. He was tired of the reputation that Mississippi was full of poor, bigoted, racist, uneducated, unkempt, and shut out white people who refused the times change. Jake swore to limit the size, scope, and role of the government and to bring more jobs to Mississippi. He pledged to bring about term limits. Nobody should be a senator for more than 2 terms, he loudly proclaimed. He also swore that he would be a 2-term senator and would not seek re-election. I am committed to standing on my principles, and for that, I am not an exception to my own rule, he promised the crowd. He also spoke about crony capitalism, which he disapproved. Jake also swore to do his damnedest to repeal Obamacare, which was a disaster from the start. Socialism will drag down this country by the backs of the working class. He was, in fact, against all social entitlements such as welfare, food stamps, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. He kept those opinions to himself because he understood the beliefs could be political suicide. Privately, though, Jake thought them all a burden on the working class who barely lived hand to mouth. He was also against taxes and vowed no new taxes. He also promised to make the government live within its means and to never raise the debt ceiling again. His biggest question was if an agency can operate for a specified budget this year, why did they need more the next? He had a political action committee created to fund his campaign and the issues called MSPAC. MSPAC? MSPAC puts Mississippi and her interests first, he swore. He would only take donations from people living in Mississippi and would not accept any volunteers from out of state. If they can't vote for me, I don't want their money. At first, the establishment was dismissive of his campaign until the Clarion Ledger, a Jackson newspaper, put an online poll showing Jake was gaining a lot of steam. This was significant because the Jackson elite didn't respect people from the Mississippi coast. The coast was mainly bastardized from the rest of the state, and it often joked that Biloxi was the devil's playground in the Bible Belt. This stemmed back to the old days when Mississippi tried its hand at the noble experiment. Jackson and the rest of the state tried to keep their anti-vice principles, and the coast decided to live freely in their sinful ways. However, the rest of the state did enjoy the benefit of the coast and its gambling revenue. Mississippi was primarily Protestant. Baptists and Methodists ran the north and central parts of the state. At the same time, the coast remained Catholic, true to its French roots, going back to the French exploration period and later Spanish colonization. The incumbent Senator Robert Wallace was a very connected Democrat when he was first elected in the early 1970s, when most of the Old South was Democrat, and in the 1990s he followed the change of the South and became a Reagan Republican. He was a yes man to the governor, and anybody else who was connected to the immense political machine of the Mississippi establishment. He took his orders and did what he was told without question. 46 years into the Senate, and all he ever did was learn to take orders and be a worm for the establishment. Anybody who dared to challenge him was usually swallowed up whole and spit out on the wrong end of the political career. Most people wouldn't dare try to come after the frail 74-year-old man who, even though he looked like a strong breeze could blow him in half, he was the most dangerous person in the Senate chamber. He had served his second year as the president pro tempore, which means he was the most senior of the senators in the majority party. Senator Wallace used this position to rally Mississippi voters behind him for fear that they would lose the privilege. This status also made him the third in line of succession to the presidency. Should anything happen to the president and the vice president was unable to serve. Jake knew that running this campaign was sure to be an uphill battle. The governor, Bill Creel, who was in his second term, owed his career to the Mississippi political machine. Bill Creel was a prominent Jackson attorney before being elected governor of the state of Mississippi. He was 55 years old, stood about 5 foot 6 inches tall, weighed about 275 pounds, and smoked illegal Cuban cigars imported into Miami, Florida by a business acquaintance of his. He had short gray hair and a bushy gray goatee. He was round, pompous ass, and he boasted himself as a trial lawyer, but he hadn't seen the inside of a courtroom personally in about 15 years. Governor Creel was known to be warm, almost grandfatherly speaker, in front of the camera with the ability to connect with most voters. It probably helped him as a trial lawyer to connect with the juries. He won a few significant lawsuits and had collected hefty multi-million-dollar fees with his law firm in Jackson. He was also a lobbyist, which garnered him a lot of the clout that he possessed in the Republican Party. He once represented a family killed in an airplane crash by suing a large airplane and suing the manufacturer of the jumbo jet. The family won $75 million, and Bill Creel raked off a cool 1/3 of the settlement. It was rumored that Senator John Kennard, a hardcore right-wing Republican from central Mississippi, and his Judiciary Committee had investigated his senior Senator Wallace and Governor Bill Creel for corruption and bribery. The investigation turned up nothing, but some of the allegations stem back to the 1980s and continuing to this day. The alleged crimes included bribery, racketeering, public corruption, and misappropriation of public funds. And he also suspected, but could not prove, murder for hire. I'll not rest until I see y'all in jail or hell, Senator Kennard once said. Senator Kennard was a former mayor of the small town of Mendenhall, Mississippi. Before he was elected mayor, he spent 8 years as a field agent for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He was trained at Quantico, but he was medically retired from the job after a bullet found its way into his left kneecap, a friendly fire accident while executing a warrant on a known cyber terrorist in Des Moines. He returned to his native Mendenhall, Mississippi, and joined the Simpson County Sheriff's Office before being turned on by politics. He served 3 terms as mayor of Mendenhall before running against an old guard senator and winning handedly. He was in his second term as senator. An average-sized man of 5 feet 9 inches tall and 175 pounds, he was a giant when he spoke. His judicial committee had thus far investigated all sorts of corruption and netted 12 indictments. Jake was sitting at his meticulously organized desk. Nothing was out of place on it. A few pictures were casually arranged on the top. His beloved Anna, 20 years after her death, and he was still in love with her. He knew she watched over him. He stared at the picture with her long flowing blonde hair under her veil. It was a picture of her that her mother had taken on the day before they were married. She had tried on the old wedding dress, and her mother decided she looked too beautiful not to capture the image. It was Jake's favorite portrait of her. Jake thought of the day they met. They were so young and innocent. He was 10 years old and she was 9. They played together, and the 2 children's parents saw a spark. The day they met was so fresh and vivid in his mind that he could see it in high definition. The two were so innocent. They played on the swing in Miramar Park, a small playground located at the foot of Miramar and Acadia Avenue, right along the beachfront. The two were playing on the toy ship that was there. The park still exists. However, the ship was removed after Hurricane Katrina. The friendship grew into a lasting relationship that spanned into their teens. It survived junior high at Michelle Middle School, high school at Mercy Cross Catholic High School for Jake, and Biloxi High School for Anna. They rarely had a crossword. They were nearly inseparable. Even the usual high school drama couldn't pull the two apart. Even though some of their friends objected to their union, "He's going to marry that girl," Jake's father often said. The two graduated high school 1 year apart and were married 1 year after, crossing the old stage. He was deeply in love with her to this day. The other pictures on the desk were one of the entire family, taken nearly 21 years ago, shortly after the cancer diagnosis that would claim his wife's life. A towering, handsome Jake in his Marine Corps dress blue uniform, a lovely blonde lady nearly a foot shorter than him, at 5 feet 5 inches tall. She was a giant in his life. And their 2-year-old son, Roy, dressed in a shirt that said, "I'd rather be smashing pumpkins." He wondered what his life would have been like if she had survived. The other pictures on his desk were of one in Iraq with Kobe Baranovich, the current Attorney General for Mississippi. They were best friends. They met in kindergarten and were closer than brothers ever since. They were the same age, enjoyed the same hobbies, and both had similar backgrounds. Kobe was of Slavic descent. His family arrived in Biloxi at the turn of the century to work in the canneries that dotted the coast. His father ran for constable in the 1980s in Harrison County and had lost by 7 votes. It was rumored that the race was won by the number of dead voters that returned from the grave and cast their ballots from the great beyond. Both had known each other from growing up in the same neighborhood on the Point. Both graduated from Mercy Cross High School and served in Iraq together in the 1990s and had graduated from Tulane Law School together in 1999. Kobe didn't stay in the Marine Corps after his initial enlistment, though, instead opting to use his GI Bill to attend Mississippi State University and eventually Tulane University of Law in New Orleans. The other picture on the desk was when both Kobe and Jake were raised as Master Masons in the Magnolia Lodge No. 120 in Biloxi. It was a proud day for both of them. Jake's rented campaign office was a 3-room storefront that used to be an old bicycle store located on Pass Road near Pops Ferry Road. It was a red brick structure with large windows in the front of the building. The large red, white, and blue 4-foot letters on the windows read proudly, "Jake Fayard for Senate." The building was well kept, and for $500 per month was a bargain. Jake had his own office in the rear of the suite. The office had white sheetrock walls and fake marble tile floor, and 3 chairs for visitors to sit while in Jake's office. It also contained an old desk. In Jake's office, the old mahogany desk, a hand-me-down from his great-uncle, another lawyer in the family, was 50 years old and held sentimental value for Jake. It was the desk that his father was sitting behind when Jake informed him that he would be joining the Marine Corps. It was the same desk that Jake filled out his college admission forms on. It was the same desk that his father's last will had been written. It was the same desk that he grew up playing on when he was a child. That desk gave the feeling of generations of the Fayard family sitting in the office. The main room where guests were received had large windows and a large glass table in the center. Plush couches were rented for the office, and the floor had red carpets, aged from the use of its previous tenants, but still in reasonably good shape. The large room also had 4 desks where staff members would do their work and answer the telephone. They were busy fielding calls from reporters all over the state, and once Jake announced his candidacy, the phone seemed to never stop ringing. Jake's uncle was still alive, but had retired from law practice years earlier. He had a small law firm called Fayard and Fayard, of which he was the only attorney. He sued Big Tobacco in the 1990s and won major lawsuits while working in partnership with other coast attorneys. Unfortunately, the lawyer Uncle Cal, and as Jake lovingly called him, had found the casino very tempting. Cal Fayard won a fortune almost overnight, had the reputation of being a shark in the courtroom, showed Jake a lot of the skills that he possessed, and lost it all at the craps table. It was also instilled in Jake to stay away from the vices of problematic gambling, which Jake did. After the fortune was lost, Cal had left the coast, and Jake hadn't heard from him in years. The last Jake knew, Cal had met some rich widow and was living in Huntington Beach, California. He used to call, but he hadn't in years. "Good morning, Jake," a polite greeting from his campaign manager, Joe Holloway. "Nice day to have a crawfish boil, don't you think?" Joe was talking about the crawfish boil, a staple in any political campaign and the way to any southern Mississippian's heart. "Yes, such a beautiful day. I hope people turn out in droves," said Jake. Jake replied. Free crawfish was indeed a way to turn people out in droves. The event was scheduled on the afternoon of April 24th on a beautiful, sunny spring day. The event was to be held at the old Broadway Marina, formerly a Grand Hotel built in the 1920s, was once the site of illegal gambling and frequented by Chicago mob figure Al Capone before his arrest. The hotel and the marina were destroyed during Hurricane Katrina and had now turned into a hangout for fishermen and partygoers alike. Jake drove his 2005 Ford F-150 XLT from his office to the Broadwater Marina. At one point, the Broadwater Marina was one of the most beautiful marinas on the Gulf Coast from Texas to Florida before Hurricane Katrina leveled the hotel and laid waste to the marina. The marina belonged to a grand hotel called the Broadwater. Before Katrina, the property was renamed the President's Casino Resort. It was one of the original legal casinos that dotted the Mississippi Gulf Coast and provided a place for families to make memories for decades. The dirt road that used to be a concrete paved road with some of the biggest yachts on the coast was slapping and beating his truck hard. "I have got to fix this suspension," he thought as he hit another pothole. His truck was not a new truck, but the old 4.6-liter Ford V8 still cranked up and ran very well. Jake wasn't the one to buy a new vehicle unless he needed to. His magnetic signs on the doors read "Jake for Senate," and on the rear of the red Ford were likewise magnetic signs. His Masonic square and compass of the Blue Lodge were there as well as his Shriner's emblem. His greatest joy in the world was taking kids who could not afford to get medical treatments to Shriner's Hospital in Shreveport, Louisiana. The amateur radio antenna on Jake's truck shook and smacked each other with every bump and made a twanging noise above his head which nearly gave him a headache. Jake arrived early, at about 9 o'clock. He helped set up the tents and the podium. A few volunteers offered to set up the crawfish pots. The flags were waving in the strong southerly breeze coming off the Mississippi Sound, and the weather was perfect. It was a nice, sunny 80-degree day with a good breeze and not a cloud in the sky. The crawfish boil started about 11 o'clock in the morning. People poured in so tight that the Biloxi Police Department had to usher people in for parking. About 1,500 attendees showed up for the rally. It was a masterpiece. More had more than that had shown up in a while. Jake was unsure if it was the free crawfish or the curiosity of a Biloxian taking out the corruption that brought people out. A big podium was set up, and loudspeakers were rented so that the speech was clear. Jake was standing behind the stage to shake hands of his supporters and potential constituents. Once it was clear that everybody had enjoyed their fill of free crawfish and Barks root beer, a coast favorite, and was settled down in their folding chairs, Jake gave an excellent speech. Jake advanced to the podium and commanded the crowd with his presence. All eyes shot forward at this giant of a man standing in front of the bank of microphones. His speech was well rehearsed and came with the booming baritone of a battlefield commander. His demeanor kept the audience engaged and dazzled with his impression. Jake proudly proclaimed from the podium, "I am Jake Fayard. I am running to be your next senator. I hope y'all enjoy the crawfish and fellowship that this event has offered y'all. I appreciate all of y'all for coming out. I stand on limited government, low taxes, and no gun control. I also offer integrity and a mission statement of service and ethics. Ethics is severely missing from politics in this state, and we desperately need our voice to be heard in Washington. I have offered Senator Wallace the chance to debate me, and he ignores me." "Boo!" the cries came from the crowd in unison. "Wallace has got to go." Jake continued, "He thinks he isn't accountable to us. He doesn't care about you. All he cares about is his Georgetown house and his political cronies. I am of you. I am a veteran. I am tired of grand designs turning into grand juries." A hush fell over the people as they couldn't believe the boldness of the young candidate. "My record of public service speaks for itself, and just as I served y'all in Iraq, I will again in Washington. I believe in small government, personal responsibilities, public accountability, and the United States Constitution. I vow not to raise any taxes and to make the government live within its means. Do y'all have any questions?" Just then a voice stepped up from the back and asked, "Mr. Fayard, what do you say to the accusation that your son is a drug addict?" A hush fell over the crowd as Jake got red-faced. "My friends, this is what I expected from my political foes. They can't attack me, so they attack my family. I refuse to dignify that question with a response, sir." The campaign party concluded, and Jake went back to his office. Those damned sons of bitches have with me for the last time, Jake said as he walked into his office. "Calm down, man," Joe said. Jake returned from his event, entering his office, and set down a large plastic bin full of crawfish. He sat at his computer and began to type press releases to be released for the next day. Jake knew he would work tirelessly for most of the night, go home and get about 4 hours of sleep, and begin his assault on the day. Jake researched legislation and the voting record of Senator Wallace in case he finally got his wish for a debate. He found that Senator Wallace had voted against legislation that would have sanctioned Iraq developing nuclear weapons, and who Jake saw as a potential threat. Jake may have been against war, but he did believe in national security. He also knew how radical Iran was, and the fact that they were developing nuclear weapons worried him. He didn't want his brothers and sisters serving to fight a regime with those kind of weapons. Jake researched the voting record back to the 1970s and saw the flip-flop. During the midterm election, he saw a significant change in 1982 when Wallace transformed from the party of a Dixiecrat to a Reagan conservative Republican. He saw it for what it was, a political move, nothing more, nothing less. Senator Wallace was anything but a Reagan Republican. And that's it. That's your chapter 1. I hope you guys enjoyed the book. I will try to get into chapter 2. So far we have read 46 pages. And I don't know if that includes or excludes 46 pages in total. So, if you would like to hear more, let me know. Against the Flow of Mississippi. Pacha, my messy background. Against the Flow of Mississippi. This is a previous copy by Anthony Allen. It's available on Amazon. It's Anthony Oksenholt now. And I hope you guys have a fantastic day. If you like this, let me know. Please subscribe and comment. I will see you guys next time. Bye, bye, bye.